Hello, I'm Holly Bebernitz. Welcome back to History Morsels. Here's a little quiz to begin. I'll say the first part of the sentence and you fill in the rest. In 1492, did you say Columbus sailed the ocean blue? That's one of the first history lessons a student learns. And when Columbus landed in the New World, he planted a Spanish flag to claim the land for Spain. France also sailed to the New World in 1534. They did the same thing, claimed lands for their country. And you know England did the same in the 1600s. We mentioned their colonies last time. By the late 1600s, these three countries, Spain, France, and England, among others, had claimed territories all over the North American continent. They not only wanted to hold on to their territories, but to make them bigger and make money from them. They needed money because all three countries were at war with each other on the other side of the Atlantic. And those wars went on for more than 100 years. Every time a new war between these countries broke out, their colonies in America got swept up into the fighting. The best known of these is the French and Indian War. Now you may be thinking, what does this have to do with John Adams and Thomas Jefferson? I thought we were going to finish their story. Unfortunately, this is a big part of both their stories. Problems with foreign countries fighting wars, particularly the French. John Adams was elected in 1796 and was the first president to live in the White House. This is a famous election. It was the first time voters were going to choose between different political parties. John Adams was a Federalist, like Washington. Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. When Adams won the election, Jefferson came in second. The rule back then was the second place winner became vice president. Can you imagine how difficult it was for Jefferson, who lost to John Adams, to then turn around and be called on to help the winner run the country? But Adams never consulted Jefferson about running the country. He ignored Jefferson's advice even in times of crisis, and there were plenty of those. The friendship they had formed in their days at the Continental Congress was over. It had been 20 years since the Revolution, and the Americans were busy building a nation of their own. They had started trading with England, with ships going back and forth across the Atlantic, taking goods both ways. The French were not happy about this and started capturing American ships, taking their cargo and even their sailors. Americans were furious and wanted to go to war, but Adams did not think America was ready to fight, and he tried to make peace instead. He sent representatives to France. The French foreign minister, named Talleyrand, refused to see them. Instead, he sent 3 men in his place to tell the Americans if they wanted France to stop attacking their ships, there was a simple solution. All they had to do was pay Talleyrand $250,000. Of course, the Americans refused. When the news got back to America, everyone was even more determined to fight the French. This event was called the XYZ Affair, Adams' code names for the 3 Frenchmen who tried to bribe the Americans. And his refusal to go to war with France was one reason Americans did not elect him for a second term. The other event was the Alien and Sedition Act we mentioned last time. Remember what sedition means? Encouraging rebellion. And that's what Americans were doing, rebelling against Adams' policies about how to deal with the French. In 1798, the Alien and Sedition Act became law. The act stated any person who wrote or printed, meaning someone who published newspapers, or spoke out against the government could be fined or sent to jail. Under this law, 20 newspaper editors were arrested. One congressman was sentenced to 4 months in jail for writing in a personal letter that Adams was selfish and pompous. Jefferson decided to run against Adams in the next election in 1800. He won the election and was the first president to be inaugurated in Washington, D.C. Inaugurate means make an official beginning, enter a position with formal ceremonies. Though Adams refused to take part in the ceremony, Jefferson tried to make peace in the speech he gave after he took the oath of office. Jefferson said, "Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." One of the first things Jefferson did was to stop enforcing the Alien and Sedition Act. The greatest accomplishment of Jefferson's presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, which he bought from the French for $15 million in 1803. By then, France had an emperor named Napoleon Bonaparte, who wanted to expand his empire in North America. But the French were still fighting the English, and Napoleon needed the money France could make from the sale. America bought the land, 827,000 square miles west of the Mississippi River. The purchase more than doubled the size of the United States. Jefferson was reelected in 1804, but his second term had few successes. You won't be surprised to learn Britain and France were at war once again. Now both countries were robbing American ships, taking American sailors into their own navies, and seizing valuable cargo. Jefferson still insisted America was going to stay out of these wars, so he imposed an embargo on sending American goods to Europe. An embargo is a refusal to do business, to buy or sell another country's products. This decision was a disaster, even worse than Adams' Alien and Sedition Act. The American merchants and ship owners suffered far worse than the English or French did. But Jefferson was sure his embargo would work and never admitted it was a mistake. But Congress ended the embargo. Jefferson left office in 1809. He went home to Monticello and never returned to Washington. One day, in 1812, a letter arrived at Thomas Jefferson's home. It was from his old friend, John Adams. They had not spoken in 12 years. John Adams recalled their days together long ago and said they should not die before they explained themselves to each other. That was the beginning of their writing letters to each other, which continued for 14 years. By the spring of 1826, the letters came less often. Adams was so ill he could no longer hold a pen. Jefferson was 83, and his health was failing too. The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence was approaching. Both Adams and Jefferson were dying as July 4th approached, but each hoped to live long enough to see the day arrive. John Adams' family feared he would not last. Thomas Jefferson drifted in and out of sleep, often waking up to ask, "Is this the 4th?" On July 4th, 1826, at 5 p.m. in Quincy, Massachusetts, John Adams died. His last words were, "Jefferson still lives." But he was wrong. Jefferson had died hours earlier. The old friends, who became enemies and then friends again, died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Did you learn any new words today? What does embargo mean? How about inaugurate? Do you remember an important date? What happened in 1803? Were you surprised to learn John Adams was the first president to live in the White House? And that Thomas Jefferson was the first president to be inaugurated in Washington, D.C.? Our nation's capital was first in New York and then in Philadelphia. How and why did it end up in Washington? Thomas Jefferson wanted to know what was in the new territory he had bought. He sent an expedition led by Lewis and Clark. You might want to learn more about what they discovered and the remarkable woman, Sacagawea, who helped them on the way. See you next time for another History Morsel.